It was May of 1943, and in the vast, unforgiving expanse of the North Atlantic, the war had reached a fulcrum. Some 380 kilometers west of the Faroe Islands, the sea was a sheet of polished obsidian under a moonless, star-dusted sky. The waters were unnervingly calm, the usual Atlantic swell having subsided into a gentle, rhythmic breathing. Upon this tranquil surface, U-456 of the Kriegsmarine rested, a slender, menacing silhouette against the darkness. She had surfaced 22 minutes earlier, a necessary vulnerability in this deadly game of hide-and-seek, her diesel engines thrumming with a guttural growl as they replenished the boat's vital batteries. On the narrow bridge, Captain Lieutenant Max Martin Teichert, a veteran of the relentless tonnage war, glanced at the luminous dial of his watch. The hands read 3:47. A deep, pre-dawn chill permeated his heavy wool coat, but Teichert was accustomed to it. This was a standard procedure, a ritual performed on hundreds of patrols by thousands of men in Admiral Donit's formidable U-boat fleet. It was a moment of calculated risk, a brief exposure to the hostile world above the waves in exchange for the electrical lifeblood needed to hunt and survive below them. His lookouts, perched with their powerful Zeiss binoculars, swept the horizon and the heavens with practiced diligence. The report came back, clipped and professional, relayed down the conning tower hatch. Cielos despejados, the watch officer confirmed. Clear skies, no visual contacts, no apparent threats. A familiar sense of cautious security settled over the commander. They were alone in the immense darkness. But they were not. Deep within the steel confines of the U-boat, the radio operator, hunched over his equipment in the dim red glow of the control room, felt a prickle of unease. A strange, insistent whisper had begun to intrude upon the crackle of the ether. He adjusted his headphones, straining to decipher the sound. It was faint, almost ethereal, but undeniably present. He spoke into the intercom, his voice tight with a tension that instantly cut through the routine calm. "Herr Captain Lieutenant, I am detecting an unusual radar signal. It does not conform to any known Allied pattern." On the bridge, Teichert's brow furrowed. This was unexpected. German ingenuity had provided them with a crucial shield in this nocturnal theater, the Metox R600 radar warning receiver. This simple device, with its distinctive cross-shaped antenna, was their electronic watchdog. It was designed to detect the long-wave radar emissions from Allied patrol aircraft, giving the U-boat commander a precious window of warning, often several minutes, to sound the alarm and execute a crash dive into the safety of the depths. The Metox had saved Teichert's boat and his crew on dozens of occasions. It was the guardian angel of the wolf packs. But this transmission was different. How different? Teichert's voice was sharp, demanding precision. The question hung in the cold night air, a harbinger of a paradigm shift in the war at sea, a technological turning point that was, at that very moment, converging upon his vessel with lethal intent. The reply from the radio room was chilling in its technical specificity. "The frequency is much higher than normal, Herr Captain Lieutenant. Almost centimetric. A wavelength of approximately 10 centimeters. Our Metox can barely register it. It is at the very edge of its detection range." A profound cold, far deeper than the Atlantic night, traced its way down Teichert's spine. A 10-centimeter wavelength. He knew, as did the entire German scientific establishment, that such a thing was theoretically possible. But his superiors, the brightest minds in the Reich, had assured the Admiralty that creating a device capable of generating such high-powered microwaves, let alone one small and robust enough for military deployment on an aircraft, was a technical impossibility for the foreseeable future. They had estimated it would take the Allies at least another 5 years of research and development. What Captain Lieutenant Teichert could not possibly know was that he was being illuminated by a revolutionary piece of technology, born not in 5 years, but in the frantic crucible of British scientific innovation. The faint signal his operator had detected was the emission of an ASV Mark III radar set, a compact, 10-centimeter microwave unit installed in the belly of a specially modified consolidated B-24 Liberator bomber of RAF Coastal Command's 120 Squadron. The aircraft was circling patiently at an altitude of 2,000 feet, a phantom completely invisible to the naked eye in the absolute blackness of the Atlantic night. Its power came from a device that would change the world, the cavity magnetron, a small copper block that had been developed in near-total secrecy by physicists at Birmingham University and perfected at the Telecommunications Research Establishment in Malvern. Inside the rattling, unheated fuselage of the Liberator, the crew had already painted the U-456 on their cathode ray screens, the faint green blip a stark confirmation of a target. They had first detected the submarine from a distance of 19 kilometers, well beyond the range of human sight. The pilot, Flight Lieutenant Alastair Robson, a calm and methodical skipper, had already commenced his attack run, guiding the heavy four-engine bomber in a wide, descending arc to position himself upwind of the unsuspecting U-boat. He and his crew were the tip of a spear forged in Britain's laboratories, a weapon designed to turn the hunters into the hunted. On the bridge of U-456, Teichert made the only decision a prudent commander could. Based on a signal his equipment could barely perceive, a ghost in the machine, he relied on the instinct that had kept him alive through 12 previous war patrols. He slammed his hand down on the alarm button. Alarm. Torsion. Emergency dive. The strident, jarring clang of the klaxon shattered the night. The practiced chaos of a crash dive erupted. On the bridge, the lookouts did not hesitate. They practically threw themselves down the narrow hatch into the conning tower. Below, the crew scrambled through the cramped compartments, a blur of motion as they sealed watertight doors and spun the wheels of the main vent valves. Seawater began to flood the ballast tanks with a thunderous roar, pulling the submarine beneath the waves. But this time, it was different. Terribly, fatally different. A typical type VIIC U-boat, the workhorse of the German fleet, required between 25 and 30 seconds to fully submerge from a surfaced position. Teichert knew this. The men of Coastal Command also knew this. It was a critical window, a brief moment of extreme vulnerability that both sides had factored into their tactical equations. What the Germans did not yet comprehend was that the Allies could now see them through every single second of that dive. The new radar was so precise it could track the diminishing profile of the conning tower as it slipped beneath the surface. The game had changed, and Teichert was about to play the final hand with a set of rules he did not know existed. The B-24 Liberator, V for Victor, plunged from the darkness at a speed of 370 km per hour, its engines throttled back to muffle their approach. In the nose, the navigator, Flying Officer James Holland, kept his eyes glued to the flickering green screen of the ASV Mark III radar. He called out the range, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Target at 5 kilometers, 3 kilometers, 1.5. At a distance of precisely 800 meters, the moment of revelation arrived. The bombardier flicked a switch. Mounted under the bomber's starboard wing, a 24-inch canister rotated forward. Inside, a powerful carbon arc ignited. A beam of 70 million candle power, a literal spear of light, tore through the night. This was the Lee light, the second component of the Allies' deadly new combination. It was designed to turn night into day, to eliminate the final sanctuary of darkness that the U-boats had relied upon for so long. The beam instantly found its mark, illuminating U-456 in a brilliant, inescapable glare. The submarine, its deck already awash with foam as it began its descent, was caught as if in a photograph, every detail starkly visible against the black water. Teichert was halfway down the conning tower ladder when the light struck, a physical blow that momentarily blinded him. He looked up, instinctively shielding his eyes, and saw a sight that would be seared into his memory for the final 90 seconds of his life. A colossal, four-engined bomber, its form monstrous and terrifying, was descending directly towards him, its bomb bay doors yawning open like the jaws of some mythical beast. A single, desperate cry escaped his lips. Mein Gott! There was no time for anything more. No time for orders, no time for escape, no time for prayer. From a perilously low altitude of just 15 meters, the Liberator released its payload. A string of Mark 11 Torpex depth charges, 4 black cylinders weighing 170 kilograms each, dropped away in a perfect, calculated sequence. They were not dropped haphazardly, their fuses were set to explode at different depths, creating a three-dimensional cube of destructive force designed to bracket the diving submarine. The first charge struck the water with a heavy splash, a mere 9 meters from the port side of U-456 hull. It was set to detonate at a shallow depth of 7.6 meters. As fate would have it, that was the exact depth the submarine was passing through in its emergency dive. The explosion was devastating. An immense bubble of incandescent gas blossomed beneath the surface. The shockwave, a near-solid wall of pressure, traveled through the water at 1,500 meters per second. It struck the 18mm thick steel pressure hull of the U-456 with a force of 140 tons per square meter. The plates, designed to withstand the crushing pressure of the deep ocean, buckled and warped in an instant, groaning in protest as rivets sheared and seams split open. Inside the submarine, hell was unleashed. For the sailors in the compartments nearest the explosion, death was instantaneous, their internal organs pulverized by the concussive force before their minds could even register the attack. Others were hurled like rag dolls against the unyielding steel bulkheads and machinery, their bodies broken by the lethal velocity of the impact. Pressure gauges and glass dials shattered, spraying the compartments with deadly shrapnel. The lights flickered violently and then extinguished, plunging the interior of the boat into a terrifying, chaotic darkness, broken only by the sparks of shorting electrical circuits. The second and third depth charges detonated in rapid succession, each one a hammer blow that widened the fractures in the wounded hull. Water, the U-boatman's eternal enemy, began to surge into the vessel, no longer a leak but a series of high-pressure jets that scythed through the compartments with the force of a fire hose. Teichert, still clinging desperately to the ladder in the conning tower, felt the boat lurch violently as its stern began to sink beneath him. The angle of the deck increased with terrifying speed, 15 degrees, 25, then 35. He tried to shout orders into the intercom, but the system was dead. He fought to make his way down into the control room, but the rising water was already at his waist, and the acute angle of the deck made movement impossible. Over the deafening roar of the invading sea, he could hear the screams of his men. 49 souls, most of them younger than 25, many on their first combat patrol, were dying around him in the dark. The fourth and final depth charge detonated directly beneath the engine room. The massive 2,800 horsepower diesel engines were torn from their mountings. The propeller shafts buckled. The aft torpedo room imploded. The pressure hull, the delicate membrane that separated life from the crushing abyss, finally gave way. The integrity of the vessel was breached catastrophically, a sound Allied sailors who witnessed such events often described with a haunting phrase, the cry of a dying whale. U-456 began its final, inexorable plunge towards the Atlantic floor, sinking at a rate of 3 meters per second. At 200 meters, the immense external pressure caused the bow and stern sections to separate. At 400 meters, the remaining sections of the hull collapsed completely, crushed into a tangle of mangled steel by the hydrostatic pressure of 41 atmospheres. From the cockpit of the Liberator circling above, Flight Lieutenant Robson and his crew watched the grim spectacle unfold, their target illuminated by the unwavering beam of the lee light. They saw the conning tower of the submarine slide beneath the waves for the last time. They saw a vast pool of diesel oil bubble to the surface, spreading rapidly into an iridescent, circular stain upon the water. They saw fragments of wood from the deck casing, pieces of clothing, and other debris float to the surface. They saw no survivors. Robson picked up his microphone and spoke to his radio operator, his voice betraying no emotion, just the cold professionalism of a job done. Signal to base. U-boat positively destroyed. Coordinates 6214 north, 833 west. Time on target, 0349. No survivors. The total time from the initial radar detection to the submarine's complete destruction had been 5 minutes and 30 seconds. The time from the moment U-456 began its emergency dive until its hull was fatally breached was a mere 90 seconds. Captain Lieutenant Max Martin Teichert was 28 years old. He had been a successful commander, having sunk 6 Allied merchant ships on his previous patrols, totaling over 32,000 tons. He had been awarded the Iron Cross Second Class just 3 months earlier. His body, along with those of his 49 crewmen, now rests with the wreckage of U-456, 487 meters deep in the silent, frigid waters of the North Atlantic. But the story of the weapon that destroyed him was only just beginning. The sinking of U-456 was not an isolated incident. It was the opening shot in a technological blitz that would, in a matter of weeks, utterly break the back of the U-boat menace. The ASV Mark III centimetric radar was the culmination of a secret war being fought not in the trenches or on the seas, but in the laboratories and workshops of Britain. Its heart, the cavity magnetron, was a device so revolutionary that when it was first revealed to the Americans as part of the Teichert mission in 1940, it stunned their top scientists into silence. The Germans, for their part, remained in a state of blissful ignorance, convinced of their own technological superiority and the impossibility of what the British had already achieved. The British had not only built the radar, they had miniaturized it, ruggedized it, and, crucially, combined it with the Lee light to create a nocturnal hunting system against which the U-boats had no detection capability and no effective defense. The impact on the Kriegsmarine was immediate, catastrophic, and decisive. Before May 1943, the Wolfpacks had operated with relative impunity at night. They would surface after dusk to recharge their batteries and use their superior surface speed to race ahead of convoys, positioning themselves for dawn attacks. Their Metox receivers gave them ample warning against the older, less effective 1.5-meter wavelength radars used by Allied aircraft. Night was their cloak. After May 1943, night became their tomb. The new centimetric radar operated on a frequency that the Metox simply could not reliably detect. U-boat commanders would receive a fleeting, incomprehensible warning moments before the attack, or, more often than not, no warning at all. The first indication of danger would be the sudden, blinding glare of the Lee light, by which point it was already far too late to dive to safety. The statistics tell the brutal story of this technological ambush. In the first 6 months of the centimetric radar's deployment, from May to October 1943, U-boat losses skyrocketed. 4 to 7 German submarines were confirmed destroyed directly by aircraft equipped with the ASV Mark III radar and the Lee light. 4 to 7 submarines, representing the loss of 2,209 experienced German crewmen and over 200 million Reichsmarks in advanced military hardware. But the psychological impact was perhaps even more devastating. The morale of the U-boat crews, once buoyed by a sense of elite prowess and success, began to crumble. Commanders returning to their bases in Lorient and Saint-Nazaire reported a terrifying feeling of absolute vulnerability. They could no longer operate on the surface during the day because of air patrols. Now, they could not surface at night for the very same reason. This crippled their ability to recharge batteries, to ventilate the boats, and, most importantly, to effectively pursue and attack Allied convoys. The Wolfpack, the core of Donit's strategy, was being systematically blinded and neutered. Grand Admiral Karl Donitz, the brilliant and ruthless commander of the U-boat arm, was forced to confront this grim new reality. In his private war diary, on the 24th of May, 1943, exactly 2 weeks after the destruction of U-456, he wrote a passage that marked the true turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic. The enemy has rendered vast areas of the ocean inoperable with their new detection methods. We can no longer operate in the North Atlantic with the current rate of losses. We have lost the Battle of the Atlantic. It was the first time Donitz, a man of unshakable resolve, had ever admitted defeat. The numbers from that month, which would become known to the Germans as Schwarzer Mai Black May, confirmed his assessment. The Kriegsmarine lost an unprecedented 41 U-boats in May alone, the worst single month of the entire war for the submarine fleet. In stark contrast, Allied convoys, which had previously suffered losses as high as 20 or 30% of their ships, were now crossing the Atlantic with losses of less than 1%. The lifeline to Britain was secure. The Germans scrambled for a countermeasure. They eventually developed the Naxos detector, which could pick up the 10 cm radar signals, but it arrived too late and in insufficient quantities to turn the tide. They engineered the snorkel, a breathing tube that allowed U-boats to run their diesel engines while submerged at periscope depth, but this drastically reduced their speed and operational flexibility, turning them from aggressive hunters into slow, blind crawlers. They designed the revolutionary Type XXI Electroboot, with its high underwater speed and advanced systems, but only a handful entered service before the war ended. Nothing worked. The technological advantage gained by the Allies was simply too great to overcome. By 1944, the U-boat war was effectively over. The boats that still dared to venture out had an average life expectancy of just 1.5 patrols. Of every 10 submarines that sailed from their pens in France or Norway, 7 would never return. By the end of the war, the statistics were staggering. Of the 1,162 U-boats built by Germany, 785 were lost to enemy action. Of the roughly 40,000 men who served in the U-boat fleet, some 28,000 were killed and another 5,000 captured. It was a casualty rate of over 70%, the highest of any branch of the armed forces of any nation in the Second World War. The centimetric radar was one of the single most crucial factors in that wholesale destruction. Yet, there is a final, bitter irony to this tale of technological warfare. The Germans had access to the secrets of centimetric radar months before the Allies deployed it with such devastating effect. In February 1943, a full 3 months before the sinking of U-456, a British Sterling bomber, equipped with an early model of the airborne radar system, crashed in German-occupied territory near Rotterdam. The radar set, which the Germans codenamed the Rotterdam Gerät, was recovered almost perfectly intact. Their technicians immediately recognized its significance. They wrote urgent, panicked reports to the High Command, warning that this technology represented an existential threat to the entire U-boat campaign. They understood, with perfect clarity, that it would render their METOX detectors obsolete and expose their submarines to surprise attack at any time, in any weather. The High Command, however, ignored the warnings. The senior generals and admirals of the Wehrmacht were institutionally preoccupied. Their focus was on the colossal struggle on the Eastern Front and the preparations to defend Fortress Europe from the anticipated Allied invasion. The frantic warnings from a few radar technicians were dismissed as technical exaggeration. They prioritized the production of tanks, fighter aircraft, and coastal fortifications over the development of countermeasures for a radar they incorrectly assumed was not yet in mass production. By the time they realized their catastrophic error of judgment, it was already far too late. The skies over the Bay of Biscay and the North Atlantic were swarming with radar-equipped aircraft, and the U-boats were being sent to the bottom in record numbers. The story of U-456 and the centimetric radar is a stark illustration of a recurring theme throughout the Second World War. Technological supremacy was not merely about who had the most brilliant scientists or the most innovative ideas. The Germans had those in abundance. It was about who could produce new inventions faster, deploy them more efficiently, and adapt their tactics more quickly. The Allies, particularly with the industrial might of the United States, possessed an unparalleled capacity to turn laboratory prototypes into thousands of operational units. They had the organizational flexibility to rapidly integrate new technologies into their armed forces and the scientific intelligence to prioritize the innovations that truly mattered. By the end of 1943, over 1,200 Allied maritime patrol aircraft were equipped with the ASV Mark III system. Every night, dozens of them prowled the transit routes and convoy lanes, transforming the vast, dark ocean into a lethal killing ground where the hunters had become the hunted. Captain Lieutenant Teichert and his 49 men were just the beginning. Night after night, somewhere in the cold blackness of the Atlantic, another German commander would be staring at his silent METOX receiver, waiting for a warning that would never come. Another lookout would be scanning the empty sky, searching for an aircraft that was already diving upon them. And another crew would begin an emergency dive that was already 90 seconds too late. With each successful attack, the war that had so nearly strangled Great Britain tilted ever more decisively in favor of the Allies,